Hi, this is Kendall Boyson, professional life and recovery coach, and you're listening to Encouragementology, the practice of instilling hope.
Hi there. Thanks so much for joining me. On this show, we will be zoning out to find some peace, unplugging from the fear zone, the hate zone, the stress zone, and, of course, the negativity zone. It's quite all right to bury your head in the sand every once in a while and find a little zen. Everything in moderation, even moderation. I can't imagine there is a person out there today who wouldn't echo that enough is enough, and if given the opportunity, welcome peace with open arms. Well, guess what? We don't have to wait for the clouds to part. We can make them separate and conjure the sun. You have the power to find and adopt a peaceful attitude. Ready to say bye-bye to the blues and hello to a sunny disposition? Before we get there, we need to evaluate the current situation. To do that, we need a higher vantage point because from down here, it's just a mess. So climb up high so that you can survey the entire situation. Everyone wants your attention, to agree with their opinions and ultimately their agendas. You don't have to seek it out. It's all around you, finding new ways to get in your face and capture your attention. How many times do you intentionally push back? Not only does every device come with ads, alerts, sound effects, pop-ups, and so on. You can't drive down the road, pump gas, get your groceries, pay a bill without someone asking for your attention and begging you to take action. It's exhausting. Gone are the days of once-a-week periodicals and scheduled news. Now opinions are flying 24/7 from every conceivable and inconceivable outlet you can imagine. Where can you possibly find peace? Okay, we aren't there yet. I found some interesting research that I haven't even considered from the Pew's Research Center on psychological stress and social media use. It makes sense to wonder if the use of digital technology could create stress. There is more information flowing into people's lives now than ever, much of it distressing and challenging. There are more possibilities for interruptions and distractions. It's easier now to track what friends, frenemies, and foes are doing, and to monitor raises and falls in status on a near constant basis. There is more social pressure to disclose personal information than ever. These technologies are said to take over people's lives, creating time and social pressures that put people at risk for the negative physical and psychological health effects that can result from stress. Stress might come from maintaining a large network of Facebook friends, feeling jealous of their well-documented and well-appointed lives, the demands of replying to text messages, the addictive allure of photos of fantastic crafts on Pinterest, having to keep up with the status updates on Twitter, and the fear of missing out on activities in the lives of friends and family. We add to this debate with a large representative study of American adults and explore an alternative explanation for the relationship between technology use and stress. We test the possibility that a specific activity common to many of these technologies might be linked to stress. It's possible that technology users, especially those who use social media, are more aware of stressful events in the lives of their friends and family. I hadn't even considered this. This increased awareness of stressful events in other people's lives may contribute to the stress people have in their own lives. Think about it. Before, you only knew about stressful situations when somebody directly reached out to you. Now you just turn on Facebook and scroll your feed, and you're drawn into every drama, chaos, Sad, tragedy, everything. This study explores the digital age realities of a phenomenon that is well documented. Knowledge of undesirable events in others' lives carries a cost, the cost of caring. This study explores the relationship between a variety of digital technology uses and psychological stress. They asked people an established measure of stress that is known as the Perceived Stress Scale, or PSS. The PSS consists of 10 questions and measures the degree to which individuals feel that their lives are overloaded, unpredictable, and uncontrollable. Participants responded on a 4-point scale from frequently to never. So feel free to play along. The 10 items were combined so that a higher score indicates higher psychological stress. The scale ranges from 0 to 30, with 0 representing no stress and 30 representing high stress. In the last 30 days, how often have you, so feel free to score these on a 4-point scale, 1 meaning never and 4 meaning frequently. Are you ready? How many times in the last 30 days have you been upset because of something that happened unexpectedly? How many times have you felt that you are unable to control the important things in your life? How often have you felt nervous and stressed? Felt confident about your ability to handle any personal problems? Felt that things were going your way? Found that you could not cope with all the things you had to do? Been able to control irritations in your life? Felt that you were on top of things? Been angered because of things that were outside of your control? Felt difficulties were piling up so high that you could not overcome them? So what were the results? The average American adult scored 10.2 out of 30 on the PSS. One of the starkest contrasts in the survey was between the level of reported stress experienced by men and women. On average, women reported experiencing significantly higher levels of stress than men. The average woman scored 10.5 on the PSS, while the average man scored 9.8. On average, men reported stress levels that were 7% lower than women. Okay, I could say something very snarky there, like, well, I knew that, but at any rate, very interesting. In the survey, respondents were asked about their use of social networking sites and the frequency at which they used these different platforms. Okay, now a disclaimer here, these stats are from 2015, so you know they are quite a bit higher and probably a little bit more diverse, because this showed Facebook used by 71% of internet users, Twitter was at 18%, Instagram, which was 17%, which I'm sure that one's much higher, Pinterest 21%, and LinkedIn 22%. Interesting enough, 5 years ago, it was found that people who used social media to post and share were not more stressed than those that didn't. I was really surprised by that outcome. For some, it was a healthy outlet for their mental well-being. Sharing and being heard and validated was important. However, there's an aspect of sharing and consuming that we haven't fully considered. This report pays particular attention to social stress. This kind of stress comes from exposure to stressful life events. It's not directly a measure of whether someone feels that their own life is overloaded. It assesses people's stress by understanding their social environment. Those who experience stressful life events often suffer a range of negative physical outcomes, including physical illness and a lower mental health. It is possible that technology users, especially those who use social media, are more aware of stressful events in the lives of friends and family. This increased awareness of stressful events in other people's lives may contribute to the stress people have in their own lives. They wanted to know if the awareness afforded by the use of digital technologies was limited to an awareness of what other people, like social capital, other people could provide, or if it also included an awareness of the problems and stressful events that take place in the lives of friends, family, and acquaintances. Such awareness is not inherently negative. In fact, an awareness of problems and hurdles faced by others is a precondition of empathy, a dimension of social intelligence, and facilitates the provision of social support. However, awareness can also have an emotional impact, a cost of caring. To measure awareness of other people's stress, they asked participants if they knew someone, other than themselves, who experienced any of a dozen major life events in the past 12 months. They additionally asked if the event happened to someone close to them, like a strong tie, or an acquaintance whom they weren't very close with, like a weak tie, or both. Their list was composed of major life events that are known sources of stress in people's lives. So you can see if any of these match your knowledge of your friends, family, and acquaintances. The survey findings were that in the previous 12 months. Okay, so they used a 12-month span. 57% of adults said they knew someone who had started a new job. 56% said they knew someone that had moved or changed homes. 56% know someone who had become pregnant, given birth, or adopted a child. 50% knew someone who had been hospitalized or experienced a serious accident or injury. 50% knew someone who had become engaged or married. 42% knew someone who had been fired or laid off. 36% knew someone who had experienced the death of a child, a partner, or a spouse. 36% knew someone who had a child to move out of the house or move back into the house. 31% knew someone who had gone through a marital separation or divorce. 26% knew someone who had experienced a demotion or pay cut at work. 22% knew someone who had been accused or arrested for a crime. 22% knew someone who had been the victim of a robbery or physical assault. Unsurprisingly, given that most people have few close social ties compared with the number of acquaintances they have, for all the events were queried, people were more likely to know a weak tie than a strong tie who'd experienced one of those stressful events. So we are absorbing all of that information. Think about the number of friends that you have on whether it's Facebook or any of the other social media outlets. Think about drawing in all of their life events into your own experience. The average adult in the sample knew people who had experienced 5 out of 12 events. People undergoing major life events can be at a higher risk of physical and psychological stress, including depressive symptoms. Even an awareness of other people's difficulties might add to stress. A number of recent studies have pointed out the emotions may be contagious through social networks. Stress may be one such contagion. Indeed, an awareness of other people's problems is associated with a range of negative outcomes like depression. The cost of caring associated with awareness of other people's stressful events may be a negative consequence of social media. For generations, commentators have worried about the impact of technology on people's stress. Trains and industrial machinery were seen as noisy disruptors of a pastoral village life that put people on the edge. Wow, they were upset about the trains. Telephones, interrupted quiet times in homes. Who would have thought? Watches and clocks added to the dehumanizing time pressures on factory workers to be productive. Radio and television were organized around the advertising that enabled modern consumer culture and heightened people's status anxieties. Ouch. Inevitably, the critics have shifted their focus into digital technology. There has been considerable commentary about whether internet use in general and social media use in particular are related to higher levels of stress. Such analysts often suggest that it is the heaviest users of these technologies that are the most at risk. Critics fear that these technologies take over people's lives, creating time pressures and put people at risk for the negative physical and psychological health effects that can result from stress. Right? I mean, how many times do you feel pressure to jump on Facebook and say happy birthday? And the more friends you have, guess what? More birthdays. Now, we all want to be informed, right? I mean, who doesn't? Nothing is worse than being in a social or professional situation where current topics are being discussed and you are clueless. Some major catastrophe is happening halfway around the world and you couldn't be bothered. Not true. You made a conscious decision to disconnect and grab your bearings. Since the competition for your attention is so fierce, the media has gotten much more clever in the way they deliver a headline. Everything has a burning building appeal to make you click. Clickbait. And because there is an endless stream of updates, it's natural to just skim the headlines to try to keep up with it all. But at what cost? My father, who suffered from Parkinson's and dementia, had to eliminate his news consumption. The headlines were so sensational that he actually felt the danger was more imminent and stayed in a state of fear. And I'm sure he's not the only one. My mother would be classified as a news junkie. She religiously reads the paper, watches the news, and checks the headlines on her phone for fun. I wondered what was really going on and how having access to news 24 hours a day could be hurting us. Markham Hyde covered this exact topic in his article for Time. He said a recent survey from the American Psychological Association found that for many Americans, news consumption has a downside. More than half of Americans say the news causes them stress, and many report feeling anxiety, fatigue, or loss of sleep as a result. Yet 1 in 10 adults check the news every hour, and fully 20% of Americans report constantly monitoring their social media feeds, which often exposes them to the latest news headlines, whether they like it or not. Of course, many people feel it's important to stay informed, as we've said, and it's understandable that news you find concerning could produce stress and anxiety. But recent changes to the way everyone gets their news, coupled with the style of news that dominates today, may not be good for mental or even physical health. The way that news is presented and the way that we access news has changed significantly over the last 15 to 20 years, says Graham Davey, a professor of psychology at Sussex University in UK. And he's also editor-in-chief of the Journal of Experimental Psychopathology. These changes have often been detrimental to general mental health. Davey says that today's news is increasingly visual and shocking, and points to the inclusion of smartphone videos and audio clips as an example. These bystander captured media can be so intense that they can cause symptoms of acute stress, like problem sleeping, mood swings, aggressive behavior, or even PTSD. Some of Davey's research has shown that negative TV news is a significant mood changer, and the moods it tends to produce are sadness and anxiety. The study also showed that this change in mood exacerbates the viewer's own personal worries, even when those worries are not directly relevant to the news stories being broadcasted. While increased anxiety and stress are reasons enough to be wary of overdoing it when it comes to the news, these and other mental health afflictions can also fuel physical ailments. Stress-related hormones, namely cortisol, have been linked to inflammation associated with rheumatoid arthritis, cardiovascular disease, and some other serious health concerns. So, if the evidence suggests the news can stress people out, why do they keep going back for more? For one thing, it's entertaining, Davy says. The human brain is also wired to pay attention to information that scares or unsettles us, a concept known as negative bias. In a state of nature, our survival depends on finding rewards and avoiding harm. But avoiding harm always takes priority. This comes from Loretta Bruning, a former professor of management at California State University. She's also the author of Habits of the Happy Brain. Bruning explains that the human brain is attracted to troubling information because it's programmed to detect threats, not overlook them. This can make it hard for us to ignore the negative and seek out the positive around us. Our brain is predisposed to go negative, and the news we consume reflects this. While your brain may find the latest news enthralling, it's hard to argue that all of the news is truly illuminating. Bruning says much of the opinion and commentary that passes for news analysis is the equivalent of lunchroom gossip. There's this idea of following the news in order to be an informed citizen, but a lot of what you see today is gossip elevated to a sophisticated level. And if the news you consume is getting you worked up and worried, and some would say this is exactly the goal of much of today's coverage, it's probably not doing your health any favors. News is not an infectious and contagious pathogen like anthrax or the Ebola. News is not an infectious and contagious pathogen like anthrax or the Ebola virus that impacts humans in relatively predictable ways, says Chris Peters, an associate professor of media and communications at Aalborg University in Copenhagen. It's extremely complicated, if not impossible, to predict how people in the aggregate will respond to news. He says we shouldn't focus on the amount of news we consume each day, but rather on the ways in which we engage with news in relation to our everyday lives and the people who feel them. If you find your news habits is messing with your relationship or well-being, some changes to the ways you interact with news may be helpful. Try to be aware of how the news changes your mood or makes your thoughts more negative, he advises. If you notice a news-induced surge of pessimism, taking a breather with mood-lifting activities like listening to music, exercising, or watching something that makes you laugh may all help counteract those dark vibes. You could also pare back your news habit. Most of us these days have news alerts set to our smartphones and 24-hour news on continuously in the background. That's just way too much. Bruning agrees and recommends limiting your news consumption to one block. Are you listening, Mother? One block each time a day, maybe lunchtime or before dinner, but definitely not before you go to bed. Staying aware and informed is a good thing, but when it comes to your health, too much news can spell trouble. I'm not guilty of overconsuming, but I am guilty of overthinking. How many of you feel that same way? It's difficult for me to shut it off. I might be thinking about to-dos, writing the list, remembering to check the list, obsessing over what I forgot to put on the list, the schedule I have for the week. What would make the schedule more efficient? Endless, I tell you. I sleep with a sleep machine turned on to white noise mixed with heavy rain, plus 2 fans to drown it out. I used to sit and fixate my eyes on something and get the stares. Have you ever done that? You just pick something. It's almost like you're in a trance and you can't look away. But what you do notice is that your body and mind are perfectly still. Try that. Just fixate on something in the room and sort of cross your eyes so that you're just stuck in a stare. With all the gadgets, though, that we have today, we forget that trick and instead grab a device to eat up any little extra time we find ourselves with. I wanted to find that feeling again, that numbing feeling naturally. So I found an article by Toni Bernard, a former law professor at the University of California at Davis. She's the author of How to Be Sick, How to Wake Up, How to Live Well with Chronic Pain and Illness. Get that. So she wrote an article for Psychology Today, Give Your Mind a Rest and Practice Not Thinking. Whoever told you to practice not thinking? Well, here we go. No one wants to, nor is able to, put an end to thinking. So let's get that out of the way. With that said, though, there are benefits to intentionally practicing what she likes to call not thinking. Discursive thinking, the constant stream of one thought followed by another, is a deeply ingrained habit. It's so ingrained that we often start thinking just to occupy our minds. Many years ago, she went on vacation and she said to herself, it would be great not to have to think about all the stress from work. But it didn't take long for other stressful thoughts to rush in, right? You can get away from work, but then you start thinking of everything else you have to do. It's an act of self-care to take a break from discursive thinking now and then, even during your waking hours. The practice of not thinking is restful, calming, and restorative. And this from the words of Aya Khema, which is one of her Buddhist teachers. If we didn't give the body rest at night, it wouldn't function for very long. The only time the mind can have a real rest is when it stops thinking and only experiences. Once verbalization stops for a moment, not only is there quiet, but there's a feeling of contentment. That quiet, peaceful space in the mind's home. It can go home and relax, just as we do after a day's work, when we relax the body in an easy chair. Here are 3 ways to practice not thinking, followed by 2 tips to help you with the practice. All 5 are from a mindfulness practice. 1. Open your 5 senses door to whatever is happening around you. When you're lost in thought, it's easy to forget that there are 5 experiences available to you aside from analytical thinking. These experiences are what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling physically. Let your attention rest on whatever sensory input is most predominant at that moment. It might be the sight of an art print on the wall. It might be the murmur of a conversation nearby. It might be the smell and taste of an apple you're eating. It might be the physical sensation on your skin of your clothes that you're wearing. When you try this, if you drift back into discursive thinking, simply note it without aversion or judgment and return your attention to what's going on at the other 5 senses doors. As you become more skilled at this practice, you can get bold and instruct your mind to stop thinking by trying to practice what she likes to call is drop it. In short, when you notice that your mind is caught up in thoughts, gently but firmly say, drop it. Then immediately direct your attention to what is happening right around you. Left unattended, the mind tends to dwell on thoughts about the past and the future. But if you consciously put your attention on the many sensory inputs all around you, you can take yourself out of this discursive thinking mode. This is relaxing and renewing on a deeper level. Number 2, open the hand of thought. Zen teacher Kosho Uchiyama wrote a book called Opening the Hand of Thought. This practice is to practice not thinking. When you realize that you're lost in unproductive discursive thinking, open your hand and lightly blow on the palm as if you were dispersing the thoughts into the air like dandelion seeds. Imagine all your trivial concerns and opinions blowing out of your hand, leaving you free to experience the world without the burden of analyzing every moment and every experience. You should feel your mind relax and a feeling of contentment arise. Number 3, let the world speak for itself. This comes from Tibetan Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron. She practices letting the world speak for itself. When she's in places like airports where she has a wait ahead of her, instead of picking up something to read or getting lost in thought about the past or future, she sits and watches what's going on around her. So if you find yourself in a waiting room, instead of giving in to that ingrained habit of picking up a magazine or grabbing your smartphone, practice not thinking by opening your 5 senses and taking in what's happening around you. You can say to yourself, let the world speak for itself. Not only does this provide welcome relief from thinking, but if you take a look around you, it's a pretty fascinating place. Now, here are 2 tips for successfully practicing not thinking. Are you ready? I'm ready. Number 1, don't let thoughts stick. As you're practicing not thinking, an unpleasant thought might arise. Thoughts, particularly unpleasant ones, tend to stick like glue. More often than not, this leads you to spin the thought out into elaborate and stressful stories about the past and future. Stories that have little or no basis in fact. Here's an example. You've consciously put your attention on all the sights around you. As you're doing this, the thought arises, I don't feel well. You could stop the thinking process right there and treat I don't feel well as nothing more than a factual description of how you feel at the moment. But instead, soon you're off on what I think of as equivalent of a guitar riff. You take that simple theme, I don't feel well, and the riff begins. I'm going to have a horrible day. Nothing will go right. I may never feel well again. Soon, the fact that you don't feel well has colored everything about your day, making you miserably emotional. Consider, though, these words from the Platform Sutra of the 7th century Chinese Chan master, Hui Neng. No thought is to see and to know all things with a mind free from attachment. When in use, it pervades everywhere, yet it sticks nowhere. Hui Neng is not saying that you'll always be able to empty your mind of thoughts, but rather he's suggesting that when a thought does arise, such as, I don't feel well, you try to respond to it without attachment, which means simply watching it until it passes out of your mind in the same way that the sound of a bird singing arises and then passes out of your mind. When thoughts stick nowhere, to use in his words, you don't go down that road spinning a simple fact into a huge stressful scenario. The Vietnamese monk and teacher Thich Nhat Hanh describes not sticking this way. Thoughts and feelings come and go like clouds on a windy day. I like to keep this phrase in mind when I'm practicing not thinking. So here's another way to practice. Let go of opinions and judgments. It's easier to practice not thinking if you put aside opinions and judgments. Doing this also brings a welcome relief from constantly passing judgment on everything around you. That can be exhausting. Most of us immediately form opinions about our environment. It's too hot, it's too cold. About people, they're too talkative, they're too quiet. Listening to this running commentary is stressful. When the Thai Buddhist monk Ajahn Chah was asked what the greatest obstacle for his students was, he replied, opinions. When you're able to let go of opinions and judgments, you're letting go of a big chunk of what's going on in your mind. Discursive thinking is a deeply ingrained habit, but there's no reason to be distressed about this. Thinking is what minds do. These suggestions are intended to help give your mind rest for a few minutes throughout the day. Consciously placing your attention without commentary on what's going on around you can be restful, calming, and restorative. So, happy not thinking. If you have to, let your friends and family know you're taking a time out. You're unplugging, you're zoning out, and you're finding peace. If you want to share encouragementology with a friend who needs to know they are not alone in this journey of self-discovery, you can visit encouragementology.com or anywhere you stream your content to receive this episode and all others. Follow us on Facebook for additional encouragement throughout the week. So I challenge you, if you feel immediate intake overload, take action and unplug. Zone out and find peace. It's perfectly healthy to be empathetic, but it's not healthy to absorb all that you encounter. You are in control of your consumption, so be responsible. I know you can do it.
Thank you for listening to Encouragementology with Kendall Boyson, where we find positive ways to handle some of life's challenges.
I stumbled through until the path was clear. That's when I found